the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, this regional roundtable for Asia Pacific on building pathways, literally building them to net zero. My name is Nora Steurer and I will be your moderator today. And before I hand over to Mr. Sudhir Sharma for the opening remarks, just some housekeeping before we start. The session will be recorded and all the participants are auto-muted. But we do love to hear from you. So if you have any questions or comments, please do send them through the chat function, which is enabled. We have an interactive poll with some questions where we like to hear from you as well. And let me just go ahead and start the first one. And we'd like to hear from you just, how are you feeling today? How's it going? We know that for some of you it's early, for some it's afternoon. So Ju, if you could just share the live poll here right now.
Yes.
Thank you, Ju. So you will see on your screen a little poll. How are you feeling today? Please give us your answer, whether you're happy, whether you're feeling confused, sleepy, or motivated. Let's just give everyone a few seconds to respond. Okay, I think we have some votes coming in and I see a mix of happy, which is highest, that's nice. And then next comes motivated, very good. And some of us are sleepy, which is probably due to being rather early in some time zones. So thank you for answering this. We have a nice agenda today, and I think I'll just go through that very briefly and then hand over to Mr. Sudhir. So we have the opening by Sudhir Sharma from the UNEP Asia Pacific office. And it's really a pleasure also for the keynote to have Mr. Quang, who's the Deputy Director General for the Housing and Real Estate Market Management Bureau of the Ministry of Construction, Vietnam. And then we have a panel discussion with really great panelists, and I'll introduce them later on, followed by Q&A, and then a particular point on a country commitment that the GlobalABC is putting together. The overall purpose of this event is, of course, to show the pathways that countries or regions are already taking to net zero and the kind of tools available. And with that, I would like to hand over to Mr. Sharma for the opening remarks. And it's a really great pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Sharma. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nora. Dear speakers, panelists, and participants. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all on behalf of UNEP to this regional roundtable conducted by Global Alliance on Building and Construction. The Climate Week, as Nora mentioned, is a good opportunity once a year for actors, governments, or otherwise working on climate change to come together and share their experiences and knowledge on addressing climate risk. So this year we are thankful to the support from Government of Japan, which has helped us organize this event, and it's organized by the Secretariat of the Convention on Climate Change in partnership with UN agencies and IGES. To me, it's a very important topic, buildings, because as we see in the past decade, the evidence has become very clear, both in terms of the increasing risks as well as the increasing intensity of the climate risks. The urgency thus of returning to net zero by 2050 is very clear, and the only solution if the global community, especially the developing countries, have to save the gains that they have made in development over the last 2 decades is to start integrating actions within the sustainable development activities. It's not all gloom. There's a lot of optimism. If we see on the scale, a number of countries, developed and few developing as well, have already pledged a net zero target mostly by 2050, some by 2060 like China. But the momentum is growing, and the share of GHG emissions by countries which have committed these targets is quite significant. Not only that, in those countries which have not yet committed such targets, the shift is very clear towards low carbon development, increasing renewable energy capacities, increasing efforts in the energy efficiency field across the sectors. And I think the IEA report which has come out is also a good news in the sense of its assessment that net zero energy sector is possible by 2050. And as we all know, 70% of the emissions come from the energy sector. So that gives a lot of hope and optimism that the existing technologies and those under development actually could help us reach that target. Now, in that context, building is a key sector, especially in developing countries, to enable the transformation to net energy, zero energy sector. Just to give you kind of an idea of the scale of emissions from the building sector, in 2018, as per the GlobalABC assessment, building sector in ASEAN, China, and India accounted for 27% of region's final energy use and 24% of energy-related CO2 emissions. And when we talk about these emissions, these are direct emissions. This does not include emissions in the construction material which is used, the manufacturing of the construction material. So it's a significant proportion of the total emissions in countries. Not only that, but if we look at the developing countries, and especially in this part of the world, the total stock of building in the floor area is going to double by 2040. And most of this construction is to happen in the coming years. So it provides a good entry point and an opportunity not to use the old pathways, but to actually move on with new opportunities in addressing the emissions. And this also connects well with what the IEA report has mentioned, that to be able to set up a platform to move towards net zero emissions by 2050, we need to increase the efforts on energy efficiency to 4% improvement per year. And that would both help reduce the capacities required in generating or converting energy for end use, and as well as the move away from fossil fuels. So that platform over the next 10 years would actually enable us to move to the 2050 target even faster. Now, when one looks at this, this is not just a climate change issue. It's not basically we're doing it because of reducing CO2 emission, but there are a number of other benefits that come with it. One of the most important one, which matters to most of the countries, is the total cost of energy that is required in running the economies. And at the same time, it addresses two big issues in the developing world, the air pollution as well as the degradation of ecosystems, which is happening because of extraction of fuels and their conversion. And most importantly, as countries are looking for economic development, it is also an economic opportunity by creating new jobs over and above what would have been created if one continued with the older technologies. And one key point which I would like to highlight here is that when we look at the cost, we do look at that upfront cost of old technologies is cheaper, but we ignore a big cost that we otherwise pay, both in terms of increased climate risk-related costs because of the damages, as well as the environmental costs that we pay. So one needs to look at that comprehensive picture, and if one looks at that, it's very clear that a sustainable, healthy, and resilient future is not possible without decarbonizing the built environment. Let me give you a bit of a background on GlobalABC. So GlobalABC essentially is an effort which was founded at COP21 as an international initiative. The initiative is committed to a common vision, a zero-emission, efficient, and resilient building and construction sector. The aim of this initiative is to be a global advocate and a catalyst to action. Provide a trusted platform to set targets and track progress, because one of the key things that we see in most of the fields, not only in buildings, is the lack of data makes it very difficult to assess how well and how far have we come with respect to our goals, and then support countries in setting priorities and measures based on their situation. So essentially, a lot of knowledge products and best practices are developed by this initiative, which can help countries make this transformation. So it is now, it has 184 members, which covers about 33 countries. And these members are not only just the governments, but it covers a whole range of actors which need to work together: the private sector, the civil society, the intergovernmental organization like UNEP, as well as other international organizations. And it's hosted by UNEP, so Nora and colleagues are the ones which are running this whole program. Just to highlight a few things about the kind of products which GlobalABC flagship is producing. So a global status report is produced for building and construction, which keeps track of annual progress and highlights the best practices, good examples. It's also worked on a global and a regional roadmap. The regional roadmap for Asia was launched in 2020. And also it developed a guide on incorporating building sector climate actions into NDCs. Now, NDCs, as we all know, are the key policy measure that the countries are taking under the Paris Agreement to integrate climate-related actions into their sustainable development plans. So that's an important guide that has been provided, how countries can actually build upon the various measures that could be taken. Then it also provides tools in terms of science-based performance standards, cost-effective, high-impact building energy policies for both not only addressing GHG emissions, but addressing the sustainable development goals. And this is as part of that initiative to reach out is what the GlobalABC carries out, the regional roundtable. It facilitates regional cooperation, focusing on best practices and exchange. It's primarily aimed at the national governments from the region. And it is about bringing together different partners and actors to help understand what's happening in the field, enable peer-to-peer exchange, and also facilitate integration of this into the NDCs. So today's event, therefore, is in that direction to discuss the level of ambition needed in the building and construction sector, as well as the tools which have been developed under the initiative to deliver that vision by 2050, and also to be able to identify the milestones for 2030. So we already heard from Nora the agenda. It's quite a rich agenda, and we have quite experienced policymakers, private sector actors who are with us today. And we hope that this event will be a call for all building and construction sector stakeholders to join efforts and work towards zero emission, efficient and resilient building environment. The event is also a building block. We'll be using the inputs and insights coming out of this event towards COP26. So with that, I look forward to, I welcome you once again, and I look forward to a very rich discussion and exchange of views on the agenda in front of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sudhir, for these great opening remarks and for setting us off so well, highlighting the importance of buildings and energy efficiency. And you're absolutely right, of course. I mean, for the Asia-Pacific region especially, we see that floor area growth is especially high here, and we have this window of opportunity now. So thank you for highlighting that. And now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome our keynote speaker on building pathways to net zero, Mr. Quang Hung, who is Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Construction, Vietnam. Mr. Quang Hung will speak in Vietnamese, and it will be interpreted. So please, over to you, Mr. Quang Hung, and to your interpreter, of course. Please turn on your camera.
Mr. Sudhir Sama. Tắt hộ chị cái mic này. Mr. Sudhir Sama, UNEP Regional Office Representative. Sao nó vẫn vào đây à? Máy này đang kết nối cái này. Đang kết nối vào cái của em. Anh cứ trình bày đi để xem nào.
Ms. Toa, we do invite you to turn on your camera so that we can see Mr. Ha Quang Hung. And Ju, perhaps you can assist them. In the meantime, I see a question coming through the chat on whether the slides will be shared. Yes, we will be happy to do so.
So can you see Mr. Ha Quang Hung now?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, I can see the camera on.
Oh, then that's maybe a problem on my end. So then please go ahead. Apologies. I think the camera is working, Ms. Toa. I think it's a problem on my end. Please go ahead. It seems to be working, so please do go ahead.
Vâng, xin mời anh cứ tiếp tục trình bày ạ. Mr. Sudhir Sama, all distinguished participants participating in the event today. First of all, I'm very pleased to participate in this event. That is the GlobalABC Regional Roundtable for Asia Pacific in developing, in building pathway to net zero. As you all know, Vietnam has the rate, and every year we have around 1 million urban people who will be added to the population. According to the forecast to 2020, the urban population of Vietnam will reach 47 million people, accounting for 45% of the population. The fast urbanization also have the positive impacts to socio-economic development. However, there are certain consequences, including the new buildings that may have negative impacts on the environment and the urban climate. That's why the government of Vietnam also pay attention to take the climate actions from the early days. Around 10 years ago, the government, the Prime Minister, also had an instruction in the housing development strategy at the national level in decision 2127 of the Prime Minister. Next slide, please. Including the viewpoint on energy efficiency, or EE, it points out that housing development needs to ensure energy efficiency according to technical regulations and standards issued by competent authorities. Together with the support of international organizations, the Ministry of Construction of Vietnam have issued the technical regulations on energy efficiency. For the technical regulations on EE building, we have the three version 2005 to 2005, 2013, and 2017. For the technical regulations on apartment buildings, we also have two versions. One version in 2019, and the current one is a new one issued at the beginning of 2021. Thus, we can see that technical standard and regulations on energy efficiency in housing projects have been rather comprehensive. However, to put these policies on energy efficiency into practice, we need in the next period, we should focus on mechanisms to support enterprises, investors, and the buyers with multi-purpose mechanism so that we can promote EE housing. energy efficiency housing. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past time, the Ministry of Construction of Vietnam. Next slide, please. Over the past time, the MOC of Vietnam has been collaborating with GIZ to implement the program for energy efficiency in building called PEP. This is a joint initiative between the French and German government in COP22 and promoted by GABC as the first program to be launched. In the period of 2018-2020, we have carried out research and studies related to emissions reduction and energy efficiency in housing and buildings. And we recognize that with the current situation of Vietnam, in order to achieve the objective of housing development with the energy efficiency and low GHG emission, we need to promote the housing segment in which buyers have a real need to live in, not to trade in the apartments. According to the reports, Vietnam have around 5,000 apartment buildings equivalent to around 40 million square meters over the past 10 years, an average of 3.2 million square meter of apartments has been developed every year, in which around 2/3 of the apartment buildings belong to the medium and low cost apartments. This type of apartments are now bought by many households because of its affordability. Therefore, since 2011 up to now, the government has been focusing on promoting this segment through different legal documents, specifically the housing development strategy, as I have mentioned. Second one is directive of the Prime Minister of 2017, and recently the resolution of the government in 2020. In the Vietnam Green Building Week organized by MOC of Vietnam in collaboration with UNDP at the beginning of 2021, there has been many investors who have shared their experiences in green housing development, and with a large proportion of products in the segment of low-cost housing and social housing with energy efficiency. On the 6th of January 2021, the Housing and Real Estate Market Management Bureau of MOC signed the cooperation agreement with the GIZ to implement the PEP program in Vietnam. Next slide, please. In the program, in collaboration with GIZ, we will provide a long-term credit package with preferential interest rate to investors and buyers of low-cost commercial housing with GHG emissions reduction and EE measures. Specifically, we will provide the low-cost commercial housing project investors and buyers with preferential loans to promote demand and supply. Accordingly, the investors can borrow with a preferential interest rate to offset the rising costs they have to bear in relation to GHG emission reductions measure. It will be around 1 to 2% of the total investment value. For the housing buyers, they will be able to borrow preferential long-term loans with the interest rate of about 6% per year, equivalent to around 75% of the market rate. And especially, this is a long-term loan from 10 to 15 years. And according to our experience, for the buyers who borrow to buy their house, the term of the loan will be more important than the interest rate. So they need long-term loans. Another thing that we do is that the equipment suppliers have the exclusive right to provide a large quantity of equipment for buildings in the project at preferential prices. The objective of the program is to stimulate demand for around 40,000 apartments, equivalent to about 5% of the condominium market in the period of 2021-2030. This is very good proportion to stimulate demand and to create changes in the market. So, and this is the low segment of the market, and it can act as a leverage to stimulate the higher segment of the market, like the mid-end, mid-high, and high-end segments. According to our calculation, within 10 years after achieving the above mentioned target to support 40,000 apartments, we can save around 6.3 billion kilowatt hour of electricity, equivalent to around 15.8 trillion Vietnam dong. Next slide, please. This is a significant cost saving that home buyers will enjoy if they take energy efficiency measures. In fact, as we know, in the market at the moment, there are some investors who have been investing in low-cost commercial housing with energy efficiency, greenhouse gases, emission reductions measures, and the total cost reason will be from 1 to 2% of the total investment, and such cost will be offset in the period of 5 years. So that means after 5 years, the home buyers can recover such costs. However, at the beginning, the home buyers are not really willing to pay 1 to 2% more for buying apartment to enjoy energy efficiency technology. So we recognize that in the beginning period of developing this market, we need to have resources, mechanisms, and policies to support investors and buyers. And buyers and investors need to access and benefit from the financial resources for climate change adaptation, energy efficiency, and green finance. Currently, the MOC of Vietnam and the IZ are collaborating in requesting capital without government guarantee to implement Vietnam Green Housing Program, calling for capital and registering necessary for technical assistance ODA project to implement Vietnam Green Housing Program in the fiscal year 2021 and beyond. Regarding capital for housing, social housing development from the government of Vietnam, we have prepared around 70 trillion Vietnam dong in the period 2021-2025 for this program to support investors, project developers, and home buyers. Ladies and gentlemen, through the Asia-Pacific GlobalABC Regional Roundtable today, we believe that with the companionship, cooperation, and contribution of international organizations, with your support, and with the highest level and determination of the MOC, with the program on energy efficiency in building, PIP program in collaboration with the IZ, we will soon realize the goal of energy efficiency, low emissions, as well as encouraging low-cost commercial housing suitable to Vietnam's socio-economic development in the coming period. Finally, I'd like to wish all of you very good health and great success to our roundtable today. We hope to receive the experiences shared by you in terms of policies and mechanisms needed to promote energy efficiency housing market in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ha Quang Hong, for this inspiring keynote and for presenting so well how Vietnam is already building its pathway to net zero. It's heartening to hear this. And as you have underlined, PEEP, the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, together with GlobalABC, is already supporting the ministry on this pathway. I think it's particularly great how you've also underlined the importance of affordability and of effective finance mechanisms to get us there. And I do already want to say that we will speak a bit more later on about a country commitment that the GlobalABC is putting together, reflecting the efforts that countries such as Vietnam are making. Now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel, and I invite all our panelists to start their cameras. We have on the panel today Septia Buntara, who is Manager for Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency at the ASEAN Center for Energy. We have Mr. Saraubh Diddi, who is the Director with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency within the Ministry of Power of India. We have Peter Graham, who is Executive Director of the Global Buildings Performance Network. And we have Ms. Alexandra Kanitz, who is co-founder and CEO of Nexial. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Oliver Woodruff, who is a senior engineer with ARUP, Vietnam. Now, before we get started with our distinguished panel, I would like to launch just another little interactive poll for our audience, because we do love to hear from all of you. And if you could just launch that poll, which of the following activities are you involved in? So that concerns all of you who've joined us today. So please do let us know. Please do take a look at your screen, and you can see it here. Which of these activities are you involved in? And please select the one or the ones that you are working on, that your organization is working on. While people are answering, Ju, I believe some of our panelists have their mic and camera disabled. So if you could take a look and help them turning on the camera, that would be great. Okay, fantastic. We do have some votes coming in. Thank you for voting. And we see that most of our attendees today are engaged with new buildings and retrofits. So this is great to know, obviously a key area. And next comes clean energy. And then we have some on materials and operations as well. So thank you for answering. It gives us a nice little snapshot. We just have a small third poll where we again would like to hear from you. Which of the following stakeholder groups do you belong to? So Ju, if you could just launch the third little poll. Fantastic. So please, if you could ask again all our dear participants to give us their view, which of the following stakeholder groups do you belong to? Okay, we have votes coming in. Thank you. And we see that most of you are policymakers. That is fantastic. That is a key target group for the GlobalABC and of course also for the Asia Pacific Climate Weeks. And and I see at the same level business and service providers. So welcome again, all of you. And we see some real estate as well, specifically. Great to have you with us. Thank you again for giving us your little your input here on your activities and your stakeholder group. It's really nice for us to see that. With that little interaction, I would now like to go to our panel, and I would like to again ask all the panelists to please turn on the camera, just so people can have a quick look whom we have today. I think mic and camera should be enabled now. Okay, I think maybe people need a moment, but that is fine. So let me just go right to our first panelists, Mr. Septia Buntara from the ASEAN Center for Energy. So Mr. Buntara, the IEA, we've heard some figures from the IEA, and the regional roadmap that the GlobalABC has been developed together with the IEA. And we know that the IEA is working closely with the ASEAN Center for Energy on the development of a buildings roadmap and a space cooling roadmap for your region. And we understand this is an iterative process with and through member countries. Could you elaborate for us, why is it so important for ASEAN to develop this roadmap? And what are potential areas of regional collaboration that can be sparked? Over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for this great opportunity to Mr. Sudhir Sharma and to you, Ms. Nora, and UN colleagues. Let me share a bit the history of our cooperation with the IEA. It's around late 2020. ASEAN commissioned a project with the IEA to deliver roadmaps towards sustainable and energy efficient buildings and cooling in ASEAN. This project is funded by the ASEAN Australia Development Program Phase 2 or ADCP2. On this, we will deliver roadmaps to support overall objectives to reduce energy intensity by 32% in 2025 compared to 2005 levels, as part of our ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation of APEC Phase 2, which covering 2021 until 2025 period. In particular, for the roadmap of EE space cooling, we mainly focus on energy efficient space cooling through air conditioners and fans, and we view it alongside with a companion roadmap for energy efficiency buildings and construction, which hopefully can address a wider range of considerations that influence sustainable cooling in ASEAN. As you know, building sector will play a major role in supporting the carbonization of the ASEAN economy through increased access to clean energy and improvement in energy efficiency to reduce energy intensity and hopefully and finally by supporting the adoption of distributed low carbon and renewable energy generation and integration process. Over its lifetime, I think similar case everywhere. Buildings carbon footprint in ASEAN consists of the embodied carbon from manufacture and processing of building materials and construction. From our 6 ASEAN Energy Outlook, although residential and commercial buildings share overall energy demand, which are not as large as those for industry and transportation sector, is still large in absolute terms. As our GDP rises across ASEAN and living standards improved, energy demand is also likely to rise, unless we need more and more effective energy efficient measures we want to put in place, including to set our target through a roadmap. So on this roadmap, we want to see the future of building development across our ASEAN member states to shift towards net zero carbon emission building. We want to see what is the requirement or challenge that existing on new urban development can be designed to address and support low energy consumption. We want to see how is building is designed to be as energy efficient as is practical and sufficient level of energy service such as for heating, cooling, ventilation and lighting, which are provided the most efficient manner that's suitable with ASEAN condition. At the end, it could achieving appropriately high level of building energy performance then allows renewable energy integration or local decentralized energy system that can be very effective to meet our demand in the future. In short, all activities described within the roadmap as essential part to play the carbonizing buildings across the life cycle in ASEAN. Talking about collaboration, the roadmap, if I'm not mistaken from your question, hopefully the roadmap could spark collaboration between stakeholders in the region, within the region. On this, we want to develop and deliver a process to build common understanding and shared ownership of our future plan, the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. Ownership is very important. And this also hopefully can incorporate ideas and insights from our member states and representing the many functions involved a successful development, best case studies, so we can get motivated to achieve the EE target. In addition, it can help ASEAN to collaborate to set more competitive and realistic target, prioritize investments based on drivers. And we want to reveal gaps. What is the current gaps in the existing policy and plans? On this, the only things we can reveal the reality to challenge the situation. Also, we're targeting a long-term capacity building and sharing experience collaboration within ASEAN to close knowledge gap among the 10 ASEAN member states. We hope also to build stakeholder or network engagement with you guys, the global players and partners, when later we able to see the existing challenge towards the target of ASEAN in building and space cooling roadmaps. In conclusion, the overall outputs of this initiative are intended to aid our policymakers in developing, adopting, and enforcing energy efficiency policies and programs. And the roadmaps hopefully can provide short-term, mid-term, and long-term targets and timelines to support the practical implementation of current and future policy. I think that's my answer, Nora. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much. This was a really interesting intervention. Thank you so much, Mr. Buntara. It's great to see that there is this roadmap, another pathway underway, which is a regional one, a sub-regional one, if you will. We have the regional roadmap for Asia, and you're essentially taking it to the next level to really look at the ASEAN-specific conditions. And I think also the emphasis on space cooling is so important, because we know that cooling demand will rise sharply, especially in your region. So thank you for sharing this with us, and also for sharing how this can give regional impulses. I think you underlined it really, really nicely with this common understanding and the importance of ownership. And with that, I would like to hand it over to our next panelist. So let's now go from the sub-regional to the national level. And I would like to invite Mr. Saraubh Diddi from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency from India to turn on his camera and to tell us a little bit about their work with the IEA on developing a roadmap for mainstreaming energy efficiency in residential buildings, which we know is an essential category. And what, in your view, Mr. Diddi, is essential for mainstreaming this energy efficiency? And what are some key actions in the short term that need to be in place for this pathway, for this vision to materialize? Over to you, Mr. Diddi.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, camera and mic work very well.
Okay, because my internet is actually a bit cranky today. I don't know, it is getting frequently disconnected. So first of all, very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. While perspective, and if we look at the cooling demand in our residential area is increasing humongously over the last decade. Reason is, one is climate change, and another is that pocket is allowing people to purchase air conditioners. So if you see from 2014, sales of air conditioners were in the range of 2 to 3 million. Now it is around 8 million sales. So it is almost 4 times sales in last 5 to 6 years. So there is a huge demand of air conditioning, and then load is increasing. So what we initiated in a couple of years back, that how we can reduce our heat load from the homes itself. So we have a code for a residential building, which is actually based on the reduction of heat load in the houses. So if you need a 1.5 ton AC, you may even lesser than that, based on the if that home is designed as per the code. But that is not the stop. that was the starting point. And when we developed this roadmap along with IEA, and that time we had a vision that where we should land up in say 2025, 2030, and 2047 as well. So by 2047, we want to have all the homes are either net zero or passive design, which are highly energy efficient, are having thermal comfort, and as well as lower embodied carbon. Because as Mr. Sudhir Sharma said, that construction industry material itself is consuming significant amount of energy. So we want that those material which are used in the homes should also be having low embodied energy. Then we look at the barriers while developing this program, that what kind of barriers we are having. Are not having information regarding energy.
Mr. Diddi, I believe the connection is a bit patchy. Perhaps if you turn off your camera, that might help.
I think I got disconnected. I don't know.
I think you're back now. I mean, feel free to turn off your camera if that's helpful for the bandwidth.
I think that will be useful. I don't know how long you.
You were only
you heard.
disconnected for a second, so I think you can go right ahead.
So I was talking about barriers, that what kind of barriers we are having, and based on those barriers, we develop this roadmap to overcome those barriers. For example, lack of evidence for energy use, or investments, or by the financial institutions. Then another barrier is cross ministerial coordination, because a lot of other different ministries, for example, Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, all those people are not talking to each other. Then pricing of electricity, because there is a cross subsidy for the residential sector. So all those barriers we are discussed, and based on that we developed our roadmap. So in the roadmap, we actually divided our roadmap in 5 broad areas. One is the new building construction, because 2/3 of India is yet to be built. So only 1/3 is already built. So you can imagine that if 60 to 70% of India is going to be built, so how much embodied energy will go, how much energy they are going to consume. As of now, residential plus commercial buildings are consuming are the second most or second largest consumer of electricity. What we are expecting by 2030.
I think Mr. Diddi got disconnected again.
I'm sorry.
Yes, you're
sorry.
back. All good. You're back.
Although I am using 2 internet connections, one dongle as well, but still it is getting disconnected. I don't know why. I'm sorry for that. So what I was saying, that we have 5 themes: new buildings, materials, system and operation, integration of clean energy, and urban planning. So in all those areas, so that we can cover every aspect from the building construction point of view, and so that when we are by 2047, when we land up in 2047, we have all the buildings near zero or net zero or the passive design construction. So without taking much more time, because I don't know whether it will. That was the theme, that by 2025 we will have.
I think Mr. Diddi, you got disconnected again.
And
there you are.
yes, I am back. I don't know what is happening. So in nutshell, just we made roadmap in a way that by 2025 short-term measures, then 2035 medium-term measures, and 2045 everything 2047 everything we will cover up for the net zero. Thank you very much for this, and thank you for bearing my net disconnections.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diddi, and no worries at all about the connection. We know how it is, especially these days. But thank you so much. This was a really great intervention, and it's heartening also to see how these efforts can be taken to the national level. I think you underlined very nicely, on the one hand, the importance to also address material consumption. As you said, I mean, the load of buildings is already there just by virtue of the materials being used. And then you also underlined, I took well note that you underlined the need for coordination between the different ministries. I think this is a challenge shared by many regions, by many countries, different ministries. Often there is no particular ministry for housing, so different ministries have different parts of it, and they don't always communicate. So great that there is these efforts underway, and also the difference between short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets. Thank you for sharing this journey with us, Mr. Diddi. With that, I would now like to go to our third panelist, to Mr. Peter Graham, who's the Executive Director for the Global Buildings Performance Network. And Mr. Graham, together with the PEEB and the GlobalABC, GBPN is finalizing a toolkit for NDCs for nationally determined contributions for buildings and constructions. And we just heard from Mr. Diddi on India and from Mr. Buntara for ASEAN on these pathways that are being constructed, on these roadmaps. Could you provide for us a short summary of what this toolkit is about, how it can be used, and how it connects, how it can enable pathways such as these? Over to you, Peter Graham. If you could also turn on your camera and microphone, Peter. And
yes, I think can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Ah, great. Well, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you very much for asking me to join this panel. And it's really, it's the second event I've been to in this week where we've heard of some real targets being set for near and net zero energy buildings, and also zero carbon and decarbonisation of the building sector, and that roadmaps are really part of the strategic approach that countries and regions are taking. So, as Nora said, the Global Buildings Performance Network has been working with PEEB and GlobalABC to develop methodologies for incorporating building sector actions into NDCs and roadmaps, and has moved through a process of developing the guidance and now methodologies for implementation and toolkit. So, Drew, could you put the next slide up, please? So, as we've been following the process, we've been supporting some of the work of GlobalABC and GIZ in Vietnam, and also GlobalABC and UNEP and UNDP in Cambodia with roadmap processes, and using the roadmaps to develop actions that are high impact, transformational, and also fundable. And in our approach, we see two ways of being able to develop the actions for roadmaps and prioritization. One of the ways that it is working is a sort of more of a top-down approach, where you work with the central governments, you work with the line ministries, and you develop a roadmap. And then using tools like the GlobalABC's regional roadmaps that provide some guidance on its areas for action, and then applying the guide, which gives you an approach and a methodology for engaging with stakeholders through mapping, prioritizing, and implementing, which I'll talk about in a second, and then through to on-the-ground implementation. And that's really where the GBPN is working now on supporting the actual implementation and take-up of the actions which have been agreed to. So that's really where the bottom-up approach comes in. And in the bottom-up approach, we have to understand the building sector being quite fragmented, and the need for a lot of long-term engagement with local stakeholders in local markets. We call that building local coalitions. And so this example on the slide at the bottom here is what we're doing in Indonesia at the moment in developing policy plans from the subnational level and moving them through to inform and support the NDC processes. Next slide, please, Stu. So one of the I suppose the architecture for the guidance on building sector actions in NDCs and roadmaps is this guide, which was published in 2019, I think. And we developed this 3-stage approach of being able to start the process of mapping what are the current activities that are going on in the sector, what is the level of data that's available, who are the main policy influencers and key stakeholders that need to be involved, and what is the distance between business as usual and the targets, which now we are delighted to hear are ambitious and towards decarbonisation. The next stage is the prioritisation stage, where we look at various actions which are able to achieve that or bridge that gap between the business as usual and the targets. And we've heard from Vietnam today that housing is a major component of that, and in most of the areas that we work in India and Southeast Asia, clearly housing and affordable housing is coming up as a priority. And so identifying those transformational actions, the things that can be done which really do reduce emissions greatly, support support adaptation goals and so on, are really important. And then the third element is implementing and monitoring, and that is where you need to build that architecture for implementation and make sure that you've got that measurable, reportable and verifiable data collection process, being able to see the implementation of the actions that are included in roadmaps and NDCs as a process of continual policy reform. So this is not something that you just do once, but it's a process of policy reform over a long period of time. Key to all of this is long-term stakeholder partnerships, really making sure you're bringing the industry along with you, and certainly understanding that the fragmentation of the industry, the prevalence of small to medium enterprises, the role of the banks, the role of municipalities, and the whole range of different cross-cutting policy measures there. So stakeholder engagement, always critical. Next slide, Ju. So we have the guide, and that sets up that architecture for action, the mapping, the prioritising, the implementing and monitoring with stakeholder engagement. Now, the good news, I suppose, is that we're not starting from scratch. We've already heard from ASEAN, from India, from Vietnam, a country, and we could add Cambodia to that list, countries that are going through this process of mapping, prioritising and developing implementation strategies for actions. And so there's a lot of information which is being generated. And this is where this initiative of the toolkit comes in with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, PEEB and GBPN. We're collecting the existing tools which enable countries and stakeholders to take action for mapping, prioritising and also implementing, and providing examples from countries who are leading the way. So this toolkit is now framed and ready for your input. It's always going to be a work in progress, because we understand that there's always tools being developed and always new knowledge and wisdom being generated from actions in the countries and regions. So the next slide, Ju. So the last slide is to say this is going to be a living platform. I'm not sure, Nora, the status of the collaboration platform on the GlobalABC website yet, but the intention is that this will be an area that is shared by many organisations that are involved in developing and implementing building sector actions for decarbonisation, and we'll be able to add our tools and methodologies and opportunities for provision of expertise and technical assistance to this platform. So that then is where I'll leave it, as an invitation to get involved and also to check out the tools that GBPN, PEEB and GlobalABC have, which enable you to develop these actions and also incorporate them into NDCs, roadmaps, and ultimately decarbonise the building sector. Last slide, Ju. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing with us the insights from the NDC toolkit that you, together with PEEB and in collaboration with the GlobalABC, are developing. I think you've outlined really nicely how the work with the countries, and you mentioned, of course, Vietnam, our keynote speaker, and also Cambodia, and it's really good that you mentioned them, as well as ASEAN and India. ASEAN as a region, to show that this is not just a toolkit out of nowhere, but it's really a toolkit that builds on the work that's being done in the countries and furthers that work to help others taking up these actions. So thank you for sharing that. And I think the link also that you highlighted between roadmaps on the one hand and NDC's nationally determined contributions on the other is a really important one, because it's not just about the roadmap sitting there, it's really also about implementing it on the one hand. You highlighted finance there, for instance, fundable actions, but also about showcasing it on the other, like showing to the world, look, we're doing it, we're building these pathways and setting an example. So with this, I would like to go to our next speaker, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome Alexandra Kanitz, who's CEO and founder of Nexial. And Alexandra, we've heard now these examples from countries, we've heard examples for toolkits, and it's all great. And at the same time, we know, and some of the countries also alluded to this, that this sector, the buildings and construction sector, is known for being incredibly fragmented. The value chain is. It's a complex value chain. And Nexial, I think, has developed a tool to help with that, to taking actions towards zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings sector, and to really enable this radical collaboration that we need. We know that there is this systems map in place that Nexial has developed, a digital platform to enable this kind of system change. And we would love for you to walk us through this tool and to show us how it supports coordinated climate action. Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you for inviting me today, and hello, everyone. I'll share the ambition of this work and how we designed it to support climate action. It was a joint effort, so Nora and Peter Graham were two of a number of organizations. I'll give a quick overview of the map and what you will find on the platform, and hopefully at the end, I'll have you interested in making use of the map as a tool for your own work. I won't spend too much on the background of the project, apart from saying that this was developed with a community of stakeholders, and you can find the name of these organizations on the platform. I was sponsored by, the project was sponsored by Laudes Foundation, and it's publicly available on the website, and that you will get a link for if you haven't yet, but also on the Race to Zero website. This was an ambitious project. It was an ambitious undertaking, as the vision was to create a built environment system map that was generic enough to be relevant to diverse set of stakeholders, and yet detailed and rich so that it was useful to stimulate real conversations like we're having today and like we're describing today. We worked on the premise that the transformation we need requires radical collaboration. It requires people from across regions, different sectors, different backgrounds and mindsets. So the challenge was to make the map comprehensive enough to accommodate a broad range of stories. We needed a shared picture that people could point at when they are talking about the issues, something they could all relate to, even though slightly different in terms of language, format, style. The vision was of a map to support people with different agendas, different points of view, but with a common challenge of collaborating towards decarbonizing our economy. So that was the ambition that we set out to do the map with. And now I will share with you a quick overview on the platform, and it's what you will be seeing when you go online as well. So we are, Drew, I am assuming you will be ready to take over if this doesn't work.
Absolutely, but we can see your screen now.
You can, so let's, okay, excellent. So I cannot see anyone anymore. So if you need me to know something about that is going on, let me know. But in the center of the map, of the platform, when you look at the screen, it's the map window where you will see the map views. On the left, there's a menu where we have some curated views that were tailored to help you navigate through the complexity of the system. On the right-hand side, there's additional information that you can see changing as I hover over different elements of the map. So there you find more references or just descriptions of the issues or the elements that we are looking at in the system. I will start with this base map. And even though we don't have time for a deep dive into it, we know that looking at it on your own for the first time can be sometimes overwhelming with so many elements and so many connections. These are necessary to tell all the broad range of stories that I was referring to earlier. But I'm hoping I can remove this first barrier that people could have by looking at it for the first time on their own. So I want to encourage you to think of this map as a game board. So if you look at what we call a map framework, which is a simple framework that provides space for the elements that help us understand how everyone works to create value in the built environment system, from government, civil society, knowledge development, dissemination, finance, built environment, etc. The base map, it has many, many elements of it on it. So if you think of a game board, it has many pieces of that game, but not often we need all these pieces. So when you start to engage people in a conversation, to tell your story, to engage on your strategies and your work and your activities, you start thinking of specific people, specific rules, obstacles in your way, relationships, dynamics you want to break. So what you want to do is make the map work to support your own story. So this initial base map view might be your starting point to stimulate, but you can also come here on that menu on the left and choose a different view, choose a simpler view, like, for example, this high-level value chain, and start looking at how other stories can be created on top of that. Or you can look at some other slightly more developed, but not as busy as the base map. So you will find that there are these views that can help you tell your story on the menu, but you can also turn on some of the elements of the map. So you could come here and click and turn some elements off, or you can turn elements on by clicking on them, or connections between different elements. So you can play with it, click on, click off, and try to create maps that help you tailor the views to your own story. A number of people also would be using a printed copy of it. Choose one view, choose a couple of elements extra in another view, and then print and scribble on them and work with it. So that's a very quick overview of the base map. You can use it to engage people before you're engaging with people, to prepare, to scope your conversation. You can use it as you engage to help people understand your perspective, understand other people's perspective. In some cases, people argue that the map creates a nice neutral common ground. So pointing at a system problem, when you're pointing at the map, it makes it less personal. It makes it more about the system that you're trying to change, as opposed to individual specific points of view. A final word of warning in terms of using the map is that it can be very easy to get distracted with specific details, like why is this person called investor and not an owner or a funder, or why is there a relationship missing between two actors. It doesn't really matter. We would never be able to capture everything that matters to everyone. What we encourage you to do is to focus on the conversation about your climate action activities, and then, like I said, pick the pieces you need, turn them on, turn them off, scribble on it, cross it out on the paper, and work to engage people, stimulating them and understanding their points of view. Finally, the phase one, focus on building this really comprehensive map, but you do find that we managed to also develop two specific stories or narratives. One clearly quite relevant for this group, where we have a number of the bigger number of policymakers. So we have a story around government and policy. We have a story around finance and ownership. And these are stories that explore the influence, levers, barriers in these areas of the system. You will find that these the views for these stories are slightly different from the base map, and they have fewer elements. They tend to have fewer elements, but still they sit within the bigger system. So it helps you keep that kind of big picture in mind as you go through the conversations. We hope you also find these stories are useful, although they were not developed specifically for one region. They still provide good stimulus and reference for conversations. So wrapping up, please go onto the platform, start with the videos here. They show all of these views that you have here, but you can watch them. You can sit back and watch and get familiar with the map. Have fun navigating through the various views and the map itself. And we look forward to hearing from you, hopefully supporting this amazing work that I'm hearing today that you are all involved in, and a lot of it clearly reliant on great collaboration across the system. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. This was a great overview over this inspiring tool to overcome the fragmentation of the value chain. And I think you highlighted very nicely, it's a neutral space to start a conversation and also to do some storytelling. And I think the interesting potential of this tool is also that it can really enable a conversation about where are the levers for making a systemic change? Where do we need to intervene? Where is an intervention high potential, and where is it maybe not so much worthwhile? So thanks for sharing that with us, and we do invite everyone to visit this tool online. I believe Ju has shared the link in the chat. I would now like to come to our last, but most certainly not least, speaker, panelist, Mr. Oliver Woodruff. And Oliver, we've now heard from a region, ASEAN, we've heard from a country, India, and we've heard about two tools on decarbonizing the built environment, on building pathways towards that. And through that, we learned about the complexity of this value chain, the importance of coordination and collaboration and radical collaboration to drive this vision. Now, you're from the private sector, you're with ARUP, and from your perspective on working with this sector in the region, what are the main challenges that you see for unlocking system transformation? And what are some trends in the sector, to be positive, that make you optimistic about delivering net zero buildings in Asia? Over to you.
Thanks, Nora. I'm assuming you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to hear from some of the other panelists about everything that's going on at a higher level. And it's great to share my experience as an engineer working in the industry. For those of you who don't know ARUP, we're our global engineering and advisory consultancy. We've been around for 75 years now. Many of the buildings that you might recognize around the world potentially has something to do with those. So we kind of have strategic partnerships with a number of companies and organizations, including C40 Cities and Ellen MacArthur Foundation, helping drive down emissions and try and cut out waste within the industry. So yes, just tackling your question there. I think today we've heard, a lot of high level discussions are ongoing, national commitments and roadmaps within the sector to reduce the emissions, which is great. What I kind of feel from my experience in the sector is it's not necessarily filtering down to industry and developers or individuals at the moment, but that is definitely starting to come, especially within East Asia. Despite Vietnam having its Green Growth Development Plan and the MOC's action plan, I do kind of find a lack of knowledge or interest among many of the developers I work with. And I think it would be great to see more regulation at a planning level to help encourage those developers and let them take the initiative to really push the sector down a more decarbonized route. And hopefully move away from the kind of conventional or the kind of green design that we have now to more of a restorative or regenerative development that we would like to see. I think society and investors are a much more knowledgeable bunch now. I've been in the sector for about 15 years and I've seen a huge change. Construction declares and the race to zero is really helping put pressure on that industry, or my industry. Rightly so. I think we make up kind of 40 to 50% of global emissions, so it's really important to drive those down. And the building sector itself is starting to commit to certification schemes. and national energy efficiency standards, but I kind of feel these don't go far enough at the moment. I think we've heard today that the main focus is actually on operational carbon and energy efficiency, but not necessarily on embodied carbon or the whole life carbon cycle. So what we would term cradle to grave carbon. Now we actually work with the WBC SD, and we recently published a report actually yesterday titled Net Zero Buildings and Where Do We Stand? And this kind of highlights the problem that we have at the moment, and that organizations aren't necessarily looking at the whole life cycle. And actually that's missing about 50% of the problem by doing so. There's just not enough focus on embodied carbon, new build, and just more focus on operational carbons. Now, that might put a slight downer on things, but yeah, just the second part of your question, I guess, would be, you know, what makes me optimistic about the trends. And yeah, I think the national commitments and the certification schemes that we have out there, whether it be LEED or BREEAM or BEAM, are fantastic ways of generating impetus, and they're a great start. And I think and what we're seeing is there is an investment into lower carbon materials. You know, concrete cure is one of them out of America, or more efficient equipment within the building services industry. And these are all advancing to help efficiencies and actually reduce both operational and embodied carbons. We're also seeing a commitment to the production of environmental product declarations in Vietnam, especially. These have been quite slow to be produced, but this is accelerating across the region, and that's great to see. Singapore and Hong Kong definitely appear to be leading the way on this. Singapore has their LUSH program, which ensures that all urban high-rise tackle green space and biodiversity loss when they're having new developments. I think that's really key, is that we don't just focus on you know, ensuring that society is okay and the environment via emissions is fine, but also that biodiversity loss is mitigated. And in Hong Kong, we work with property developers like Swire and Hong Kong Land, who are also operational in Vietnam. And they're working hard to create buildings that don't just kind of, you know, add on gimmicks or confine themselves to the certification schemes, but projects like One Taikoo Place actually help create buildings that marry new and old technologies to really push the boundaries of what's happening in the industry. And I guess I just, you know, echo the Deputy Director's comments on Vietnam and Cambodia as well, actually, is that renewables are taking off in a massive way in both countries, wind and solar especially. But affordable housing is also starting to come to the fore. And I would say to date, main developers have been kind of focused more on chasing profits a little bit, and now they're switching that to focusing more on sustainable development and seeing how key it is to create spaces that provide safe, comfortable, and diverse homes for lower to middle income members of their society. And I think all of these are really helping create a good, or making me much more excited and optimistic about the industry. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Oliver. This was great, and it's really nice to hear the perspective from the private sector, from ARUP. And I think it's so interesting. I mean, you're essentially sending a signal and saying, look, to policymakers, saying, look, we need more planning regulation to put pressure on this industry and to encourage this interest, this lack of interest that you say we're now seeing with developers. So this is really well noted, and this is something that we are indeed also hearing and seeing from other industry. And I think also the emphasis you had there on not just minimizing, so to speak, impact of construction, but to take another approach and to say we need to talk about restorative development is also something that we're seeing. We've had another event with an architect bureau who have a very similar approach. This is really heartening, and I think also the life cycle perspective you underlined there. So with that, I would like to extend a very warm thanks to our distinguished panelists. It was so great to hear the actions, the pathways, the tools that you have all underlined, really quite inspiring. We are a little bit short on time, but I do see some questions that have come up through the chat, and I from Vietnam, who has a question to Mr. Diddi from India. And he would like to know about the experience from India in promoting energy efficiency in buildings. Have Indian states made it compulsory for buildings to use state budget to, if they use the state budget, to first comply with the energy efficiency building code? So is this code compulsory? And is is applying the roadmap essential for buildings invested for investment by the private sector? So, Mr. Diddi, if you'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, actually, we are promoting energy efficiency in buildings in government sector, but it is mandatory only for all type of buildings. For all commercial buildings or residential building, it will be mandatory. It will not be specific to the government or private sector. But yes, we are pushing government buildings that you do on a faster mode. For example, Public Works Division,
I think we're having some internet connection issues again. While we're waiting for Mr. Diddi to be back, I believe Mr. Ha Quang Hung is also very... Sorry, I
today
think we're
back.
No worries. You're back, Mr. Diddi. Go right ahead.
So we are handholding government departments who are constructing buildings to support them in designing of energy efficient buildings. So first net zero building in our country was from the government of India only. So, but as a policy perspective, no. Answer is no, that it will be mandatory or compulsory for all buildings, whether it's government sector or private sector. So wherever it is becoming mandatory, it is for all sectors.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diddi, for answering that question. And I think we also have some keen interest expressed on the report that ARUP, that Oliver has released, that ARUP have released yesterday. So Oliver, if it's online, maybe you'd like to post the link in the chat here. I believe there's some participants who are keen to see that.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, with that, let me close the panel. Once more, warm thanks to our panelists. I think we've really heard some inspiring stories and actions being taken. We've heard, of course, there is this landscape of action and there are these tools, and it's really important to pull that together and to show globally, look, this is what's happening. These are the countries, regions, cities, industry, and so on that are taking action. And in order to do that and to show that, and in order to inspire others who maybe have not yet taken this action, the GlobalABC is putting together a country commitment that is really focused on specific measures to take. It also has an element of overall emission reduction, but the emphasis here is really on the actions, the roadmaps, building a roadmap, having specific policies in place, and so on. And with that, and we would love to share this with you here today, and to invite anyone who's keen in participating in this commitment, either as an expert to advise us, or in their function as a country representative to join the commitment. And I would like to invite my colleague Jonathan Duwyn to share with us the outline of this commitment. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Nora. Ju, I think we can start the presentation. I mean, as Nora said, we are now engaging with, we have engaged actually with our member countries to start developing a commitment in the context of the run-up to COP26. In the next COP, there will actually be a Buildings Day. So that was also one of the reasons, since buildings is actually high on the agenda overall. It's actually a great opportunity after, I would say, 5 years, because when the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction was launched at COP21. There was also a Buildings Day, but now between COP21 and COP26, there have not been any other Buildings Day. So it's really an opportunity again to kind of show the commitment of the countries and also all the other, I would say, stakeholders engaged in buildings and construction sector, really to move towards, raising the profile overall and raising the ambition of the sector, since it has, as we have heard from all the previous discussions already, a very important role to play in terms of reducing emissions, increasing resilience, but also tackling issues of resource efficiency overall. And resource efficiency is also closely linked to what we were talking about when we talk about embodied carbon. So as Nora was mentioning, we have actually engaged with our member countries. I mean, we have, as you can see on the slide here, 33 member countries. But we are aiming to invite other countries to join this commitment. We are still in the process of finalizing, I would say, the exact wording, or I would say the commitment form. But I'm going to run you through what we have put forward. There are basically three key areas that we are putting forward. One is roadmaps and targets as one of the key issues. The second one is about aligning policies with the Paris Agreement, and finally a specific one about finance. And then, since there are a lot of other commitments also that are being prepared in the run-up to the COP that are related to other constituencies than governments, we want to also make sure that all these commitments kind of work hand in hand under the buildings and construction sector. So for the first element is really about pushing the idea of developing national building and construction roadmaps. And this includes some of the discussions that we have had about the importance of establishing local coalitions or national alliances, and bringing in all the stakeholders at the national level to support the government towards developing those targets and roadmaps, but also to ensure like the implementation is based on a collective action for a collective impact, I would say. And of course, when we talk about the roadmaps, we've been mentioning it earlier, there's quite a bit of work that has been looking at the operational side of, I would say, buildings, but not that much on the embodied carbon so far. This is still a little bit of a new topic, gaining a lot of traction, I would say, in this run-up to the COP. So this is a very important element that is also highlighted as part of the decarbonization roadmap here, to look at both the operational and embodied carbon. Another important element that we are putting forward that can be closely linked to that is, of course, the importance of, in a sense, circularity and the reuse of materials, and also looking at the local realities, and in that context, mentioning about vernacular architecture and how you can actually also use nature-based solutions to actually avoid the need of energy, for example, through natural cooling solutions. Next slide, Juice, please. So then the second strong element on the country commitment is really pushing the policy measures and incentives. So it's about the policies looking at the new and existing buildings, and also specifically pointing at public procurement as a lever to lead the transformation. And so the idea is that we want to make sure that all these policies actually are well aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. Well, this is, of course, looking at the new buildings to achieve net zero operational and embodied carbon, promoting environmental product declarations. So this is really important in the context, again, of reducing embodied carbon, so that we know actually the materials that we use, what is their embodied carbon before they are actually brought on site. Then there's the importance of measuring, and in that context, on the GlobalABC side, we are promoting especially the building passport as one way to ensure that we know what is in the building at the start, but also over the operation of the building, we are able also to track whether the performance of the building continues during its operation. And then we link it to, of course, the race to zero and the race to resilience, which are put forward at the COP, especially as the important drivers for the non-party stakeholder action, so that the policies actually really support also the non-party stakeholder action and are aligned with the non-party stakeholder action. I mentioned the data with the building passport, but data we realized, especially when we are working with countries on the national roadmap, that data is still a major challenge in many countries. I mean, in some countries, it's even difficult to find data about their current building stock, for example. And as mentioned earlier, of course, the issue of local materials, locally adapted architecture, finding more local solutions in general are really high also in the agenda and need to be integrated into the policies. Yes, and then circularity, thinking about end of life and what we can do actually to reintegrate, I would say, parts of, or I would say ensure that we reuse waste, possibly from the building side. We can recycle materials and reuse part of the materials for new buildings or for the refurbishment of existing buildings. Next slide, please, Ju. We have made a distinction, of course, between, I would say, developing and emerging economies, and looking at the more high-income countries, where for high-income countries, we want to make sure that they adopt building code standards towards carbon neutrality as soon as possible, and no later than 2025. And then specifically look at building stock renovation. This is, as you know, very already high on the agenda in Europe, where there was a renovation wave initiated. So they are really looking, because of new construction maybe being less of an issue in Europe, is because we are more talking about our existing building stock, and the need for new buildings is not as high as in a number of the other regions in the global south. And then ensure we have a common framework for industrial investment at the city and regional level. So next slide, Ju, please. On finance, the commitment specifically looks more at the high-income countries, and this is linked to ensuring that we align all buildings-related funding with the Paris Agreement goals, so that also development support programs and international climate finance actually is aligned with the Paris Agreement and supports the building and construction sector with the Paris Agreement goals in mind. Sorry, Ju, you went too fast with that one. And then especially thinking about the COVID recovery, that all the subsidies to buildings and construction actually really are looking at the stimulus fund, are actually going through our decarbonization and resilience of buildings. So ensuring that sustainability is embodied in, you know, these strategies that are being put up, especially in the recovery, current recovery of COVID. Next slide, please, Ju. So finally, less of a commitment, but I would say more something that is important in general for all the countries also to recognize when they join this commitment, is that there are a number of other commitments and efforts put forward at the international level to push this agenda. And it's important, of course, that these are taken into consideration when actually engaging action on buildings and construction for all the countries. So also with the idea that, of course, it's not the national governments on their own that will make the change, but that actually they need to engage with all the different actors. And here specifically talking about the number of commitments coming from the business sector, but also from the financing part, looking at the development banks and the private banks. So that's give you an idea of what we are putting forward for the COP, and we are in the process of bringing our countries on board and hoping that many other countries will join the commitment and join us at the COP to, spread the word and show that in the buildings and construction sector is really critical to make the change. Thank you, and Nora, over to you again.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for giving us an overview over this country commitment. And as Jonathan said, we do have a number of countries who are very interested in signing this. So if you're keen, if this sparked your interest, send us a message at global.abc@un.org, and we're happy to have you become involved. With this, I would like to close this roundtable, and once again, warm thanks to all the speakers. Special thanks to our keynote speaker from Vietnam for the inspiring story on the pathway that Vietnam is building, and also to all the other panelists. It was really great to hear your examples, your actions, your tools, and also a warm thanks to all of you for attending this event, for answering our little polls, and for your questions. We are keen to continue engaging with you. You can find more information at globalabc.org. We will share the slides with everyone, and we do invite you to become involved, become a member of the Global ABC if you're not already a member, and become involved with the country commitment if you're keen. With that, thank you so much once more, and have a great day or evening. Goodbye.
Thanks, Nora. Well done.
Thank you. Bye-bye.